Okay, students, so I'm going to talk about Poe. I'm going to start reading you a little bit of the Cask of Amontillado, and then we'll talk about it. The 1,000 injuries of Fortunato I'd borne as best I could, but when he ventured upon insult, I vowed revenge. You, who would so well know the nature of my soul, will not suppose, however, that gave utterance to a threat. At length I would be avenged. This was a point definitely settled. But the very definitiveness with which it was resolved precluded the idea of risk. I must not only punish, but punish with impunity. A wrong is unredressed when retribution overtakes its redresser. It's equally unredressed when the avenger fails to make himself felt as such to him who has done the wrong. It must be understood that neither by word nor deed had I given Fortunato cause to doubt my goodwill. I continued, as was my end, to smile in his face, and he did not perceive that my to smile now was at the thought of his immolation. So this opening paragraph, slightly archaic language, you might have to look up a couple words if it's not clear, but basically what he's saying is he wants revenge. He doesn't want to be punished for his revenge. So he's going to present himself as a friend until it's time to really make his enemy suffer. Okay, so that's the gist of that paragraph. If you're doing an aesthetic reading of it, you can think about, again, language and effect. Poe actually was super into theory, and he, in addition, you may know him from his short stories, from The Raven. I wouldn't be surprised if you'd read it in high school, but he also wrote a lot about poetic theory, and he thought very consciously about the effect of words and being able to create a horrific effect with the kind of layering on of little bits of building tension, okay? And the choice of language. So you really see that more, I think, in his poetry. So we'll look at The Raven and that. But here, I think it's interesting. I would call it an aesthetic criticism, an aesthetic sort of reading to think about the genre that he's working in. And he's working in the genre of horror, and horror is a genre of mood. If you see a horror movie and you are not horrified, if you don't have little chills down your spine, if you're not getting a little bit scared, then I think it's sort of failed as horror, okay? That's very different from something like science fiction. Science fiction can have all kinds of different moods. It's not a genre of mood, it's a genre of form, you might say. And of course, even if horror is a genre of mood, it's not going to scare everyone. There's individual reader response to it. We'll talk about reader response theory later in the semester. But still, I think that's the general goal. Okay, so that's why we're looking at Poe as the example this week. So I'm going to now jump ahead. If you haven't actually read the story, it's a great story. I don't want to spoil it for you, so I recommend pausing the video. Go and read the story, because I'm not going to talk about what happens at the end, okay? So, and it's not very long, it's like 8 paragraphs, maybe a little longer, but not long, okay. So at the end of the story, he has now lured his enemy down, promising this fabulous wine, this cask of Amontillado, and has tricked him into getting into this little recess in the stone, and then the narrator chains him up, okay? What Poe does at this point is he doesn't just be like, oh, yes, I've chained you up, I have my revenge, now I'm gonna kill you. No, Poe is interested in creating an effect, okay? So you're reading along. And Fortunato is still not really figured out what's going on. And he says, okay, so withdrawing the key, I step back from the recess. Pass your hand, I said, over the wall. You cannot help feeling the nitre. Indeed, it's very damp. Once more, let me implore you to return. No? Then I must positively leave you. But first, I must render you all the little attentions in my power. So that's a very sarcastic set of lines. He obviously has chained the guy up. So when he says, I implore you to return, Fortunato can't return. He is chained up. So then the narrator says, I'm going to render you all the little attentions. Normally, you would say that if you were going to do nice things for somebody in this era, but that's not what's going to happen. Going on, as I said these words, I busied myself among the pile of bones of which I have before spoken. Throwing them aside, I soon uncovered a quantity of building stone and mortar. With these materials and with the aid of my trowel, I began vigorously to wall up the entrance of the niche. So he's walling it up. Then Fortunato starts sobering up and realizing what's going. I had scarcely laid the first tier of the masonry when I discovered that the intoxication of Fortunato had in a great measure worn off. The earliest indication I had of this was a low moaning cry from the depth of the recess. It was not the cry of a drunken man. There was then a long and obstinate silence. I laid the second tier and the third and the fourth, and then I heard the furious vibrations of the chain. So here, what I ask you to look at are the ways in which Poe is kind of drawing this out. The writer is giving you the second tier, the third tier, the fourth tier. He hasn't told you definitively what he's going to do, but you're starting to get a sense that something terrible is coming, right? And you knew that from the first line. You know, it says he told you that it was going to be about revenge, but it wouldn't give you that feeling, that chill, that horror, if he just, you know, in 3 sentences said, you know, I had an enemy, I tricked him, I chained him up, and I left him to die, right? I mean, that's basically what happens. But instead, Poe is using language to create an effect, right? The noise lasted for several minutes, during which, that I might hearken to it with the more satisfaction, I seized my labors and sat down upon the bones. Okay, so Fortunato is groaning loudly, and the narrator responds by stopping work so that he can enjoy his enemy's misery, right? And is sitting on bones. All of that is kind of adding to the effect. When at last the clanking subsided, I resumed the trowel and finished without interruption the fifth, the sixth, and the seventh tier. The wall was now nearly upon a level with my breast. And then again, it slows down, he pauses, there's screams, etc. And then he keeps stopping and starting and stopping and starting through the rest of this, right? And all of that is going to be increasing the effect of tension, of suspense. And then finally, Fortunato gets to speak again in the last paragraph and is you know, pretending, haha, this is a good joke, an excellent jest. We'll have many a rich laugh about it at the palazzo over our wine. The Amontillado, I said. He, yes, the Amontillado. But is it not getting late? Will they not be awaiting us at the palazzo? The Lady Fortunato and the rest, let us be gone. Yes, I said, let us be gone. For the love of God, Montresor. Yes, I said, for the love of God. But to these words I hearkened in vain for a reply. And then in the last lines, Fortunato has given up, the full horror falls on you. Montresor finishes breaking him up in the catacomb and piles the bones in front. For the half of a century, no mortal has disturbed them. In pace requiescat, rest in peace. So there you go. Hopefully that helps you think about the ways in which writers might use language, and also what tools they might use to build tension to help create a mood and create a certain kind of aesthetic effect. Okay,